Lord of Mysteries, My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 511 to 519. How was this trip? Pretty nice, right? No need to worry about promotion or the apocalypse. Don't you feel like your humanity has stabilized a bit? Upon hearing Lynn's words, Klein was momentarily stunned. Indeed, this period could be considered the most relaxed time Klein had experienced since his transmigration, aside from his days in Tingen. He didn't have to think about the role of the miracle invoker, didn't need to worry about the impending apocalypse, witnessed an era that only left fragments in history, and even became the teacher of his archenemy's child, stabilizing his humanity through teaching. So, is that why you brought me on this journey? Klein couldn't help but ask. One of the reasons, yes. But mainly because traveling alone can get lonely. Lynn said, glancing at Klein. His tone suddenly became somber. I'm sorry for constantly pushing you forward during this time. But that won't happen anymore. You're now capable of protecting yourself and have strong enough allies. So, from here on out, just enjoy this journey. Klein was once again taken aback. He suddenly realized something and looked at Lynn, pressing his lips together. But Lynn simply smiled and said, all right, let's head to the next era. It's about time I introduce you to Antigonus. Meanwhile, in the fifth epic, Amon, who had been temporarily entrusted to Bethel in a crystal ball due to Lynn's time travel, suddenly opened his eyes, his expression indescribable. What's wrong? Bethel, who was reading a book beside him, noticed this and asked. Bethel, is humanity really that important? Amon asked his old colleague, showing a rare look of confusion. Despite not lacking anchor points, Amon had never had normal humanity. His anchor points were all himself, and his humanity was highly unique. Humanity. Bethel closed the novel in his hand and looked at Amon. Though unaware of what Amon had experienced, he earnestly said, I don't know how others see humanity, but to me, if I were to completely lose my humanity, I'd rather die. I don't understand. Amon's eyes showed a rare trace of bewilderment. Compared to the peaceful and romantic third epic, when Lynn brought Klein to the end of the fourth epic, the nation of Evernight was engulfed in war. What's this? The Church of the Evernight Goddess destroying the nation of Evernight. Even though Lynn hadn't explained, Klein immediately understood the timing of this journey. Yeah, Lynn nodded, sighing as he watched the war-torn nation of Evernight. Come on, let's stop this war. The Evernight Goddess's destruction of the nation of Evernight wasn't driven by personal grievances but more due to the fact that Antigonus' power had become too dangerous. As half a fool, Antigonus had benefited from the War of the Four Emperors, killing the old Zaratwal and acquiring his Attendant of Mysteries characteristic. However, everyone knew Antigonus' state. With the experimental help of Amon and others, he had absorbed the uniqueness, but this caused his humanity to destabilize, and the consciousness of the Lord of Mysteries had mostly revived within him. If he continued to ascend, it would essentially offer the Lord of Mysteries a vessel for revival. This was something the Evernight Goddess could not allow. Thus, at the end of the fourth epic, the Evernight Goddess, who had been treating Antigonus and his nation of Evernight as irrelevant, took action to destroy them. This led Antigonus, who had lost his anchor points, to lose control, dissolve into a swarm of worms of spirit, and ultimately be secretly imprisoned by the Evernight Goddess. Aware of the cause of the war, Lynn took Klein directly to the heart of the nation of Evernight, where the battle between the Evernight Goddess and Antigonus was taking place. It was clear that both Antigonus and the Mother of the Sky were fighting desperately against the Evernight Goddess. Unfortunately, the gap between a King of Angels and a Sequence 0 was too great. The advantage in the war was obvious. How about stopping the fight here? Lynn smiled as he spoke, borrowing power from his true self. With a snap of his fingers, the entire battlefield froze as if someone had pressed pause on a movie. 3 seconds later, time resumed, but this time, both the Evernight Goddess, Antigonus, and the Mother of the Sky restrained themselves and stopped fighting. They all turned to Lynn, and after a brief pause, seemed to understand something. You've come to fulfill our agreement? Antigonus asked, sounding incredulous. He was surprised both by the fact that someone like Lynn could travel freely through time and space, and that the man had actually kept his promise to come save his sister. The Mother of the Sky, unaware of the agreement, was somewhat confused, but after gaining memories related to Lynn, she understood that this was no ordinary individual and seemed to have some relationship with her brother. The Evernight goddess, on the other hand, was more straightforward. She looked at Lynn and directly asked, "Have you chosen Antigonus as the Lord of Mysteries?" "No way. Absolutely not. Don't say things like that," Lynn quickly denied, shaking his head vigorously. He shot Antigonus a disdainful look and said, "It's not that I look down on him, but with his current state, if he ascended to the Lord of Mysteries, it'd be like handing the former Lord of Mysteries a vessel on a silver platter." At this, the atmosphere turned even more silent. Antigonus opened his mouth as if wanting to refute but didn't know what to say, nor did he dare. "Why are you looking at me like that? Have you finally decided to become my pet, little Antigo?" Lynn asked with a grin, making it clear that if Antigonus agreed, he would immediately take up the role. Antigonus. He lowered his head, pretending he hadn't heard anything. What's so bad about being my pet? I treat my own people really well," Lynn muttered unhappily. Then, remembering Antigonus' appearance after losing control, he wrinkled his nose in disgust and said, "I didn't even mind when you turned into a swarm of worms after losing control. So ugly." Antigonus. He remained silent, but a pair of fluffy ears appeared atop his head, and a soft, bushy tail sprouted from his back. However, the tail hung low, indicating its owner wasn't in a good mood. Klein. Amonizes. Mother of the sky. Didn't you say you'd never be a pet? Then what is this? The three of them had this same thought in mind. End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Compared to the three who were speechless, Lynn was quite satisfied with Antigonus' actions. He updated his impression of Antigonus in his mind and then looked at the Evernight goddess, saying, "I promised Antigonus to save his sister. Could you give me this favor?" Amonizes' gaze fell on the Mother of the Sky, then returned. She said calmly, "I can let her go, but Antigonus must be restrained. The resurrecting consciousness of former Lord of Mysteries within him has reached a dangerous level. I cannot allow such a bomb to roam freely." The Evernight goddess didn't care much about the fate of the Mother of the Sky. Although killing her would allow her to turn her into a vessel for divine descent, it wasn't like the Evernight goddess couldn't find another way if she really wanted to. Her main reason for the destruction of the nation of Evernight had always been Antigonus. Upon hearing this, Antigonus gritted his teeth, his gaze sweeping over the people present, lingering on Klein for several seconds before finally turning to the Evernight goddess. He said, "So, if I go with you, you'll spare my sister and the nation of Evernight, right?" Amonizes looked at Antigonus, a slight expression of surprise appearing on her face. "It seems you've made up your mind." Antigonus forced a smile, looking somewhat despondent, yet as if relieved. "In any case, I can't become the Lord of Mysteries. Rather than everyone dying here, it's better that only I do." Antigonus knew very well that he could never defeat the Evernight goddess. The gap between a King of Angels and a Sequence Zero was too vast. Moreover, she had several Sequence Zero allies behind her. From the very beginning, he was destined to lose. In fact, if it weren't for Lynn's presence, he wouldn't even have this chance to compromise. Given Amonizes' ruthless nature, even if Antigonus were willing to compromise, she wouldn't have allowed such a threat to remain. Given the situation, it was better to take advantage of Lynn's presence and make a proactive offer. This might allow him to save the others in the nation of Evernight. Antigonus remembered very clearly that his agreement with Lynn only included saving his sister, not the other people of the nation of Evernight. Moreover, Antigonus glanced once more at Klein, who was standing beside Lynn, before lowering his head in frustration. Amonizes looked at the dejected little demon wolf and couldn't help but laugh. She then turned to Lynn and said, "I can stop the destruction of the nation of Evernight and spare the Mother of the Sky, but they must be kept under supervision. I cannot allow a nation that harbors hatred toward the Evernight Church to go unchecked, nor can I permit a Sequence 2 who resents me to roam freely." While the Evernight goddess could personally ignore such things, she had to prevent these entities from causing trouble in the secular world. Beyonders from the seer pathway could indeed be troublesome if they decided to cause chaos. Lynn wasn't surprised by the Evernight goddess conditions. He simply shrugged and said, "Then perhaps you wouldn't mind leaving them under the supervision of the Church of Steam and Machinery." Although the Church of Steam in this era had not yet undergone the transformation Lynn envisioned, he trusted that artisan wouldn't let him down. The Evernite goddess naturally thought of Artisan who had surrendered instantly in the fourth epic, which made her smile and nod. That's acceptable. Thus, the agreement was reached. Those in the nation of Evernite, who were currently in battle with the Beyonders of the Evernite Church, simultaneously received orders to cease fighting. Lynn then hurried off to find Artisan of this era, who, as expected, didn't disappoint him. After regaining his memories, Artisan immediately knelt and swore he would properly arrange for the people of the nation of Evernite. And so the relocation began. For the sake of Church of Steam supervision and to reassure the Evernite goddess, the people of the nation of Evernite couldn't remain in their homeland. They had to follow the Mother of the Sky and leave, with Church of Steam arranging for them to settle within the Intis borders. Luckily, the so-called nation of Evernite was, in truth, just one city. The population wasn't large, so the move wasn't overly cumbersome. As for the original land of the nation of Evernite, it now belonged to the Evernite goddess, who transformed it into a prison to confine Antigonus. So, you'll be stuck in this wretched place for over 1,000 years. Thinking about it, that's quite cruel. Lynn remarked, looking at the dejected Antigonus sitting on a stone chair. He stroked his chin and continued, come to think of it, losing control in your original fate might have been a good thing. Once you lose control, you won't have any sense of time. It'll be like waking up from a long sleep, painlessly dropping to sequence 2. Losing control is never a good thing, right? Antigonus, who had been moping, finally couldn't hold back and spoke up. Though I can't leave the nation of Evernite, I've always stayed here anyway. But waiting to die doesn't feel great. Ha ha ha, I was just joking. Lynn chuckled, flicking one of Antigonus' drooping ears. In a comforting tone, he said, but, waiting to die, isn't accurate. You won't die. You'll just drop to sequence 2. Antigonus froze for a moment, staring blankly at Lynn. So, you're not planning to kill me. Why would we kill you when we have no grudge against you? Lynn rubbed his chin in thought, then nudged Klein beside him with his elbow, asking in a curious tone, Merlin, are you planning to kill him? Klein, who had been innocently called a pawn, showed a slightly helpless expression. His mind, however, was filled with the future image of a bewildered Antigonus, waking from a long slumber. This made him smile slightly as he replied, although we do need the fool's characteristics and uniqueness from Mr. Antigonus, if possible, I'd much prefer to coexist peacefully with him. Antigonus perked up immediately, his drooping ears standing upright once more, and his tail wagging. You should have said so earlier. If it's just a matter of dropping to sequence 2, I can totally accept that. Antigonus didn't seem at all upset about his upcoming demotion. In fact, he was positively excited. Antigonus had never been overly ambitious about advancing in rank. His main reason for seeking promotion had always been to protect himself, his sister, and the people of the nation of Evernite. But now, the people he wanted to protect no longer needed his protection, so his desire to ascend was greatly diminished. Truthfully, since integrating the uniqueness, Antigonus had been in a terrible state. He didn't like the constant threat of being replaced by others, but until now, he had no choice. To protect those he cared about, he had to keep moving forward. But now, he could finally take a break. End of chapter. However, Antigonus seemed to have thought of something. After a moment of hesitation, he looked at Lynn and said, since that's the case, if I give you my characteristic now, can I go find my sister? Cutting characteristics for the full pathway wasn't particularly difficult, or rather, the Mysteries families had an advantage in this regard. Good question. Lynn blinked, looked at Antigonus, and after thinking for a while, said, but you know, the time-space you're in right now is actually in the past, so I was just joking earlier. Once I leave, for you, it'll be just the blink of an eye, and you'll already be in the future. Lynn was being truthful. Just like how the history he changed didn't create a butterfly effect, the people whose fates he altered during his journey couldn't really experience those moments without him again. They would, like Medici and others, directly face changes in their destinies by the fifth epic. The reason Lynn altered young Amon in the third epic wasn't that he hoped the young Amon would cause less trouble in later history but rather to affect the Amon of the fifth epic. After all, compared to adult Amon's rigid worldview, young Amon was much easier to deceive. Once young Amon's worldview wavered, the memories and emotions that the adult Amon would receive could impact him to some extent. This was like breaking through a fortress from the inside, far more efficient than trying to directly change adult Amon. Hearing this, Antigonus seemed to understand something, but he merely looked hopeful and said, "So, when the future me opens my eyes after you leave, I'll get to see my sister. More or less, though you might have to wait a few days. After all, your sister has to travel to see you," Lynn said with a smile. "That's great," Antigonus laughed like a joyful puppy. He suddenly looked at Klein and said, "So, you're the future Lord of Mysteries." Yeah, you could say that's me." Klein paused for a moment, then nodded, not denying it. "Aren't you afraid the previous Lord of Mysteries might awaken within you?" Antigonus asked seriously, his eyes filled with pure curiosity, not malice. Klein was silent for a few seconds before saying, "I used to be afraid, but I'm not anymore." In the past, or in the original timeline of his fate, Klein had indeed been afraid, something he had no issue admitting. But now Klein was no longer afraid. It wasn't just because he had a cheat-like friend like Lynn. It was because Klein knew there were many people counting on him to become the Lord of Mysteries. They would support him, and they would be his strongest anchors. "That's good." Antigonus sighed and muttered, "I was scared too. After accommodating the uniqueness, I became very afraid. I could feel it gradually awakening within me. Sometimes, I couldn't even tell if I was still Antigonus or it." Antigonus held an old puppet in his hand, a gift from his sister, the Mother of the Sky. With his gaze lowered, Antigonus continued, "I was even more afraid that if one day it fully awakened within me, what would it do to my sister? What would it do to the people of the nation of Evernight? But I couldn't, at least not until now, give up on advancing. This world is too dangerous. I had to protect them," Antigonus said, then suddenly smiled. He looked up at Klein and said, "But now, I can finally give it up. I'm no longer afraid." Klein pressed his lips together. He remembered the fragmented memories of Antigonus during the apotheosis ritual and, imitating Lynn, patted Antigonus on the head, saying, "Don't worry. What you want to protect will definitely have a bright future. In this regard, Lynn does have a good track record." Antigonus was momentarily dumbfounded, clearly not expecting the miracle invoker in front of him to suddenly attack. And then, he heard the miracle invoker ask, "By the way, would you like to work for the Church of the Fool in the future?" Lynn, who overheard this, pushed up imaginary glasses, his eyes becoming sharp. Fifth Epic, Nation of Evernight. After what seemed like a long dream, the worms of spirit sitting on the right seat in the foggy town's cathedral suddenly gathered together, finally condensing into a young man with furry ears on his head and a tail behind them. Antigonus blinked in confusion, as if he hadn't fully grasped the situation. After a while, he touched his ears. Without doing much, the wolf ears became even furrier, looking irresistibly soft to the touch. "So, you're a true Tsunere, aren't you? You say you don't want to be Lynn's pet, but in every way, you're becoming just that." A familiar yet strange voice echoed, causing Antigonus's fur to stand on end. However, he quickly remembered something and calmly said, "I'll be working for Lynn in the future." Hey! The Evernight goddess couldn't help but laugh upon hearing this. She finally appeared in the cathedral, not using 0 to 17 as her descent vessel, but another grade 0 sealed artifact. Beside her stood the Mother of the Sky, looking no different than she had 1,000 years ago, now free from the state of being a sealed artifact. However, the Mother of the Sky seemed utterly confused. She could understand what had happened, but had no idea how something so absurd could have occurred. "Sister." Antigonus's eyes lit up when he saw the Mother of the Sky. He couldn't help but think, Lynn hadn't lied. He really saw his sister the moment he opened his eyes. While the sibling reunion was happening in the fifth epic, Lynn and Klein set off once again, embarking on a new journey. This time, their destination was much closer to their own time, the Rissell era. More precisely, it was the later stage of Rissell's era when Lynn's third identity had descended. So, this time, they were greeted by the enthusiastic welcome of Lynn's third persona, who had been well prepared. "We're here to attend the renaming ceremony of the Church of Steam and Machinery," Lynn explained cheerfully before Klein could ask. Renaming ceremony. Klein's expression became subtly odd. He glanced at the other Lynn and whispered, "So, you've already fully remodeled the Church of Steam and Machinery." End of chapter. As one of Lynn's closest friends, Klein was somewhat aware of Lynn's plans. He knew about Lynn's reform of the Church of Steam and Machinery. Unlike using the citizens of Silver City and Moon City as anchors and believers, Lynn's approach was more straightforward. He simply seized an existing church. And the unfortunate target was none other than the former god of steam and machinery. It's pretty much done. You know, during this period, the only figures of significance within the Church of Steam and Machinery, besides Artisan, were the Pope and Roussel, Lynn said casually. Since Artisan switched sides, the former Pope didn't hesitate to follow. With these three biggest insiders working from within, it was really easy to reform the church, Lynn remarked, turning toward Klein. You've done something similar before with the Church of the Sea God. Klein was silent for a moment, unable to deny Lynn's reasoning. Transforming a church from the bottom up could be difficult, but doing it from the top down was much easier. It was even simpler than taking over a country. Sequence 0 figures and angels naturally held overwhelming power, and religions already leaned toward fanaticism. So when the church's God supported a transformation, taking over the church became a straightforward task. Indeed, the reforms of the Church of Steam and Machinery had progressed smoothly with the three insiders' help. Though little time had passed in Lynn's main world, the time difference between realms meant that in the current reality, years had gone by. Lynn and his closest subordinates had thoroughly reshaped the church to fit their vision. Now, the Church of Steam and Machinery essentially worshipped Lynn himself. Understanding this, Klein quietly accepted that the church now belonged to Sotos. However, he asked out of curiosity, so, what do you plan to rename the Church of Steam and Machinery? I originally thought of calling it the Church of Machinery, but that felt too similar to the old name. So, I decided to name it the Adeptus Mechanicus instead, Lynn said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Klein, that's a Warhammer reference, isn't it? Exactly. Lynn nodded in confirmation. Klein tried to suppress his expression using his clown powers. So, you're now the Omnizeia. Correct. Lynn replied with a bright smile. Klein was at a loss for words and could only say, aren't you worried that future transmigrators will come looking for you? No problem. Let them come. I can help them with their work schedule by introducing them to 24/7, Lynn said with a mischievous grin. Klein. He truly didn't know how to respond to that. Lynn suddenly remembered something and added, oh, today isn't just the renaming ceremony for the church. It's also the inauguration of the new pope, Roussel. Klein wasn't surprised by this announcement. So, Roussel is going to be working 24/7 now. He joked. Not really. Roussel managed to drag Bonneva into helping out. If anyone will end up working 24/7, it'll probably be Bonneva, Lynn explained with a shake of his head. Klein, what's with all of you delegating everything to others like outsourced 24/7 working corporates? Don't you do the same? Lynn asked, having noticed Klein's thoughts. Klein was silent for 3 seconds before admitting that Lynn was right. If he could, Mr. Fool would love to outsource as well. After all, no one enjoyed working 24/7. While they were chatting, the two of them unknowingly arrived at the headquarters of the Church of Steam and Machinery. In the Grand Hall, the church's leaders and promising young members had gathered. The outgoing pope stood on a high platform, reading the divine message from the new god. Quote, From today onward, the Church of Steam and Machinery shall be known as the Adeptus Mechanicus. We shall revere our Lord as the Omnizeia. A new angel will also join our Lord's side, the Angel of Steam, who has served our Lord since the fourth epoch, though they had been lost for some time, the Pope declared calmly, showing no sign that he was already in on the truth. Though the announcement stirred some murmurs, the years of reform had left most attendees relatively composed. After announcing the church's new name and angel, the Pope proceeded with the ceremony to inaugurate the new Pope. This part of the ceremony came as no surprise. Over the years, Roussel's contributions to the church were undeniable, and he had earned widespread respect. Most considered him the ideal candidate for the position. As Roussel accepted the crown from the former pope and placed it on his head, Lynn couldn't help but smile. From now on, the Church of Steam and Machinery would be a thing of the past. The Adeptus Mechanicus would take its place, becoming one of the deepest marks Lynn had left on this world. Not bad at all, Lynn murmured, his thoughts drifting. There was only one last thing he needed to do, one more event to witness. Klein, gazing at the spirited Russell on the platform, felt a bit dazed. He glanced at Lynn beside him and suddenly said, "As long as I'm here, the Adeptus Mechanicus will always be your anchor." Klein knew that Lynn would soon leave to face his destiny. He wasn't sure when, or if, Lynn would return. But as Lynn's closest friend, Klein vowed to protect this important anchor, ensuring no one else could take it away. Lynn paused, then smiled, a radiant, sincere smile, free of any danger yet full of joy. "Thank you, Mr. Fool," he said warmly. Meanwhile, in the fifth epoch, Russell, who had been planning when to visit his youngest son, suddenly froze, his expression shifting. A moment later, Russell received a call, a prayer from Bonava. "Ahem, Bonava, what's the matter?" After a few seconds of hesitation, Russell answered the prayer. End of chapter. Bonava, is there something you need? Russell's heart was slightly uneasy at this moment, though Bonava didn't seem to notice. "Father, there are several tasks beyond my authority that require your personal decision," Bonava reported earnestly, as if unaware of the profound changes that had reshaped history. Like many others, Bonava accepted the altered timeline without question, treating the new reality as a natural truth. Not just Bonava, everyone who hadn't interacted directly with Lynn failed to notice the upheaval in history. In the minds of the uninformed, the Church of Steam and Machinery had always been the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the god they worshipped was naturally the Omnizeia, with Russell as its pope. As for Russell's fall, people remembered it, but they had a simple explanation: Russell had once walked the wrong path, leading to his downfall. Now, however, he had been redeemed by the Omnizeia, returning as the Church's pope once again. All the contradictions. Everyone ignored them effortlessly. "Ah, are you referring to the affairs of the Adeptus Mechanicus?" Russell asked tentatively. "Of course. What else could it be?" Bonava responded, puzzled by his father's strange question. Russell, suppressing his discomfort, asked a few more questions. The answers only heightened his unease. "Damn, this is too weird. Lynn's abilities are really something else," Russell muttered to himself, coughing to clear his throat. "All right, I'll get to work." Since he had promised to work under Lynn, Russell intended to fulfill his duties. Most tasks were managed by Bonava anyway, leaving him with only a few things to handle. As for his fear of Lynn's strange powers, well, fear was part of it. But more than anything, Russell was relieved to have secured such a powerful ally. After all, to be honest, nothing in this world was truly normal, even his own powers as the Black Emperor were bizarre. So while it unsettled him, he could still accept it. Everyone's a monster at this point. What's the big deal? Quote. We're back. After parting with Russell, Klein glanced around uncertainly. "Yes, we've returned to our era. This marks the final stop on our journey." Lynn nodded, confirming Klein's guess. He gestured toward a nearby theater and smiled. "Our last activity will be watching the popular opera The Creator's Return." "Yes, it's exactly what you think, performed by the Northern Lights troupe and heavily endorsed by the Evernight Church." Klein's expression grew complicated. He had kept a close eye on the Northern Lights troupe ever since they gained fame with their New Year's performance. The troupe had quickly become one of the most sought after in Backland. It wasn't surprising. The members of the Aurora Order may not have excelled in other areas, but they were undeniably beautiful. After intense training, they had mastered singing, dancing, and other performance skills. On top of that, thanks to Lynn, also known as the Angel of Secrets, the Northern Lights troupe received significant support from the Evernight Church. With such powerful backing, even a mediocre troupe could rise to fame. And the Aurora Order was far from mediocre. But Klein hadn't expected them to be so bold. The Creator's Return. Just from the title, he could tell it had something to do with the true Creator. "The Evernight Church doesn't mind?" Klein asked, intrigued. "Not at all. Although the opera tells the story of the ancient sun god's era, you know how these things go. The script isn't entirely faithful to history, it's been tweaked quite a bit," Lynn said, smiling as he made a gesture of a miniature cosmos with his fingers. "In this version, the Evernight goddess plays a positive role. She's portrayed as the sun god's sister, both born from the original creator, which, to be fair, isn't too far from the truth." Klein. Well, he supposed he wasn't entirely surprised. "Come on, stop daydreaming. We'll be late if we don't hurry." We planned this down to the minute, Lynn said as he pulled the fool into the theater. A staff member, moonlighting from the Aurora Order, led them to their VIP box. The play had already begun, depicting the moment when the second creator, the ancient sun god, was born from the original creator's remains. What surprised Klein was that although actors portrayed the gods, they were encased in symbolic props, showing only emblems without any physical forms. It quickly became clear why. From the fifth epic onward, gods no longer presented themselves in human form, using symbols instead to avoid polluting the minds of believers. The same principle seemed to apply to the play, ensuring the audience wouldn't form concrete images of the deities. Once he understood this, Klein continued watching. What intrigued him further was that despite the opera's title, The Creator's Return, the plot didn't focus solely on the ancient sun god. Instead, it depicted the struggles of humanity during that era, showing how humans fought to survive under the oppression of foreign races, received the sun god's salvation, and gradually learned to save themselves. The combination of brilliant performances and a well-written script made the opera deeply moving. It explored themes of redemption and human nature from both divine and mortal perspectives. Even though Klein already knew the history, he found himself exhaling softly at the end of the performance. After a few moments of silence, he asked, "I assume the public's perception of the true creator has changed significantly." "Yes," Lynn said with a smile. "Want to meet the true creator? After all, he's kind of an old friend of yours." End of chapter. Klein paused for a moment, seemingly realizing something. He hesitated before asking, "Has he really awakened?" "Yes." Lynn nodded with a smile. After the Solomon Empire's victory over the Tudor Empire in the fourth epic, the faith in the true creator naturally spread within the former Tudor territories. With the establishment of the true creator's church in the Solomon Empire, believers flourished everywhere. Thanks to this vast faith, the once half-crazed true creator finally regained clarity. And with the timely shift in public opinion during this fifth epic, he avoided developing split personalities. Reflecting on this, Lynn couldn't help but mutter, "As expected, I had good foresight." One reason he allowed the Aurora Order to emerge was to give these reckless beauties something to focus on, preventing them from causing trouble. It was also a strategic move to reconnect with the happenings of the fourth epic. In hindsight, Lynn's plan proved wise. Reversing public perception was crucial. Seeing Lynn's expression, Klein couldn't help but chuckle. After a moment of contemplation, he shook his head and said, "I'd better not. You know how awkward it would be if I met the true creator." Even though Klein had dealt with the true creator many times, he couldn't forget what he had done to him. While they were no longer friends, meeting face to face would undoubtedly be uncomfortable. "It's probably better not to meet." Lynn wasn't surprised. He shook his head and clapped his hands. "All right then, I officially declare this time travel journey over." He patted Klein's shoulder with a grin. "Now, it's back to working hard toward promotion. Remember, happy moments are always short-lived, and working 24/7 is what life's really about." Klein smiled wryly at Lynn's words but couldn't help feeling a touch of melancholy. He looked at Lynn and asked softly, "What about you?" "I'll soon face my own path," Lynn replied, calm and cheerful. "But before that, I have to meet the true creator." "Don't worry. Before I truly leave, I'll definitely let you know, and maybe even leave some important items behind." Lynn smiled reassuringly. After their farewell, Klein returned to the Sherlock Detective Agency, while Lynn made his way back to the forsaken land of the gods to meet the true creator. "So, are you really ready?" Lynn asked Adam, who stood before the curtain. During their journey, Adam had contacted his divine incarnation, informing him of his plan to merge with the true creator. "Even if I'm not ready, you wouldn't let me delay any longer, would you?" Adam smiled slightly, lifting his gaze to meet Lynn's. "You're quite self-aware." Lynn didn't deny it. He had intended to settle this matter before leaving. He wouldn't leave such a dangerous bomb in Saucerier's hands. Adam merely smiled. Lynn then looked toward the curtain, more precisely, at Saucerier behind it. Actually, Saucerier seemed to want to say something, but Lynn cut him off. "There's no, actually." Lynn blinked and said seriously, "Saucerier, you know Adam lacks humanity. He wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice Medici if necessary. Someone like him isn't suitable to be the dominant personality after the fusion, right? You're the one with clarity now. It should obviously be you. Saussure was momentarily speechless. While he didn't particularly care about leading, Adam's lack of humanity did give him pause. That was why he had resisted merging with Adam for so long, even when he was mad. All right, Saussure sighed, reluctantly agreeing to Lynn's suggestion. That's more like it. Lynn grinned, handing the 008 quill to Saussure. Please, Lynn gestured toward Adam with a smile. Without a word, Adam stepped toward the curtain. Just before entering, he paused and glanced back at Lynn. If possible, tell Medici I'm sorry, Adam said softly. I was never someone he should have sworn loyalty to. Lynn raised a brow and smiled. He doesn't need your apology, and he won't forgive you. The proud Red Angel could die for the one he served, but he would never forgive betrayal or abandonment. I never expected him to forgive me. With that, Adam stepped through the curtain, which closed behind him, shrouding everything in darkness. Lynn stared at the darkness for a few seconds, then turned to a shadowy corner. Will you forgive him? He asked quietly. A snicker came from the shadows as Medici emerged, unwilling to delve into the topic. Instead, he smirked at Lynn. How much longer? Once Saussure and Adam complete their initial fusion, I'll leave, Lynn said with a smile. But I won't be gone for too long. I'll return when the new Lord of Mysteries is born. All right, I'll be waiting, Medici replied, leaning casually against a rock. But if you're late, don't blame me for spreading all your embarrassing stories everywhere. Embarrassing stories? Do I even have those? Lynn feigned confusion. For instance, Medici began slowly. Someone initially denied that the true creator was Saussure, only to realize he was wrong later. Stop. Lynn interrupted quickly, exasperated. All right, you win. The two shared a look, then burst into laughter. Come back soon. I will. The fusion between Saussure and Adam proceeded smoothly. Once Lynn confirmed that Saussure had become the dominant personality, he took his final step and drank the potion to ascend. Finally ascended to Paragon, Lynn exhaled deeply, feeling the power within him. He could now choose to merge his Smurf accounts or create new ones in this era. Without hesitation, Lynn decided to descend as the fourth Smurf account during the first epic. End of chapter. At the beginning of the first epic, when Lynn's consciousness descended into the fourth Smurf account, he found himself in a place that didn't seem quite right. Or rather, the surrounding aura of Sephiroth was overwhelmingly thick, making it easy for him to determine his location. This is, inside the knowledge more. Lynn rubbed his chin thoughtfully, as if a mouse searching for cheese had suddenly been thrown into a cheese warehouse, marveling at how strange fate could be. No, it isn't mere coincidence, it's inevitable. After all, I am both a paragon and a king of angels on the hermit pathway. The knowledge more and I naturally attract one another like two massive magnets. Appearing here makes perfect sense, Lynn thought to himself as he absorbed the powerful aura of the knowledge more. After a brief moment, he decided to assimilate it. For most Beyonders, absorbing Sephiroth would require hesitation, but Lynn had no such concerns. Thus, at the end of the fifth epic, all high-ranking Beyonders, including angels, instinctively turned in a specific direction. Is this the birth of Demon of Knowledge? Did Lynn successfully ascend? Klein, who held the Saphira Castle and bore the title of Miracle Invoker, felt the shift as well. He stood abruptly, pacing nervously before sensing a familiar presence approaching. As expected, a spatial door opened the next second, and a familiar figure stepped through. It was unmistakably Lynn, though there was a subtle strangeness to his aura, making Klein tense before immediately relaxing. Relax. I'm still me, at least for now, Lynn said with a gentle smile, though a flicker of confusion lingered in his eyes. Just moments ago, after fully absorbing the knowledge more within the first epic, Lynn recalled all of his Smurf accounts and ascended to the Demon of Knowledge. The process went surprisingly smoothly, almost too smoothly to believe. However, as he completed his ascension, memories long sealed away resurfaced all at once. With newfound clarity, Lynn finally understood the purpose of this journey, and what he ultimately needed to do. Here, take this. A prismatic bubble materialized in Lynn's hand, which he then offered to Klein. Klein, could I ask a few favors of you? What do you need? Klein cautiously accepted the crystal bubble, his gaze steady. First, after I leave, try to maintain the traces I left in this world. If possible, I wouldn't mind if you spread word of me, like you did with that poet friend of yours. It'd help extend my influence, Lynn said with a grin, raising a finger to emphasize his point. I promise, Klein nodded solemnly. Second, keep this crystal bubble safe. It's crucial, whether I remain myself depends entirely on it. Lynn's gaze rested on the bubble as he chuckled, after all, it's part of me. Klein stiffened, feeling as though the seemingly light bubble weighed 1,000 tons in his hand. Ha ha ha. Lynn couldn't help but laugh at Klein's reaction. He then added, and third, become the Lord of Mysteries. Once you achieve that, the timelines of Altered and the original one will fully merge. That's when my ritual will reach completion, and I will return. Klein's brows furrowed slightly as he tried to comprehend, but in the end, he chose not to ask further questions and simply nodded. All right, I understand. There's no need to rush, though. Rather than rushing into becoming the Lord of Mysteries and falling into slumber, I hope you take your time, solidify your state, and ascend steadily, Lynn said with a playful wink. Otherwise, what's the point of altering the timeline? Klein was momentarily stunned, then nodded again, feeling touched by the words. I will. Goodbye, little fool. Lynn smiled brightly. I hope we meet again. The next moment, Lynn dissolved into countless shimmering bubbles. The bubbles vanished without a trace in an instant. Lynn. Klein gazed up at the sky in silent longing, before tightening his grip on the crystal bubble. Meanwhile, in another space-time dimension, countless bubbles appeared out of nowhere and gradually reformed into a humanoid shape. Lynn opened his eyes, taking in the familiar space around him with little emotion. Following his plan, he activated the ritual he had prepared before losing his memories, severing himself completely from Yog-Sothoth. Are you truly ready? Came a message from the link between him and Yog-Sothoth. Of course. I've prepared for this day for far too long, Lynn replied with a smile. Then, do as you wish. The separation began, using the demon of knowledge as a foundation and channeling the accumulated energy Lynn had gathered over the years. A new outer god was about to emerge into the cosmos. However, just as the split from Yog-Sothoth completed, a soft laugh echoed beside Lynn's ear. Happy coming of age, my child. Now, let your dear mother grant you your final initiation. A nameless entity appeared from the darkness and quickly took on a humanoid form, Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, a being on par with Yog-Sothoth. You, Lynn began to speak, but the chaos behind Nyarlathotep surged forward, swallowing him whole. It wasn't just Nyarlathotep's immense power at play but the darkness already festering within Lynn. See, I've given you so much, how could I not expect this day to come? Nyarlathotep chuckled softly, gently cupping Lynn's face with an affectionate touch. What are you trying to do? Lynn's fragmented voice emerged from the dark abyss. What am I trying to do? Ha ha ha, I simply want to see if I can use you as a vessel to devour my beloved big bubble. Nyarlathotep laughed, his voice full of indulgent malice. You must know by now, Lynn, you're special. You are the humanity that Yog-Sothoth wasn't meant to have. Opposite his divinity, only an independent version of you can serve as the perfect medium for me to consume him. Nyarlathotep sighed, as though lamenting a fond memory. Do you know how much effort I put into your creation? In some ways, I am your mother, even if you refuse to admit it. Don't worry, though, I won't devour you. You're too adorable. I'll keep you as a little bubble of your own, Nyarlathotep whispered, even as chaos and darkness completely engulfed Lynn. In that moment, however, Lynn made his decision. Rather than let himself be consumed, Lynn chose to return to Yog-Sothoth, embracing his divine self. And so, he became Yog-Sothoth. Nyarlathotep could easily swallow Lynn, but devouring Yog-Sothoth was another matter entirely. Is it worth it? I wasn't lying, I would have kept you intact. It wouldn't have been any different for you. Nyarlathotep sighed, surrounded now by shimmering bubbles. But now, you've lost yourself entirely. Yog-Sothoth glanced at him, his gaze cold. I wonder, what would happen if I devoured you instead? Ha ha ha. Then try it, my dear Yog. Nyarlathotep burst into laughter, unperturbed. End of chapter. Lynn had already been gone for 3 years. 3 years may not mean much for an angel or true god, but for Klein, it had been a long time. During this period, he donned the alias of Merlin, traveling through every city in the Loan Kingdom, leaving behind the legend of the self-operating wishing machine while smoothly digesting the miracle invoker potion. After that, Klein had long been prepared to go to the forsaken land of the gods and obtained the Attendant of Mysteries characteristic. Using the monsters of the forsaken land as materials, he built his own marionette town. After 6 months of preparation, he successfully completed the Attendant of Mysteries ritual. Upon ascending to the status of Attendant of Mysteries, Klein found that the Sequence 1 potion almost melted in his mouth. However, instead of rushing to ascend to the Fool, he followed Lynn's advice, choosing to stabilize his condition first. After confirming that his humanity was intact, he took possession of the remaining 2 Attendant of Mysteries characteristics, along with the Fool's uniqueness, before proceeding with his ascension. This time, Klein didn't use Antigonus to complete the ascension ritual. After advancing to Attendant of Mysteries, Klein confirmed that his ascension ritual to the Fool was already complete. In fact, the ritual had been completed long ago, when Klein first time traveled with Lynn. The fooling history ritual had been perfectly executed then. After ascending as the Fool, Klein still didn't rush to become the Lord of Mysteries. He chose to stabilize himself, and today, 3 years later, he had finally adjusted his humanity to its best state. Above the gray fog, Klein sat at the head of the bronze table. In front of him were the characteristics and uniqueness of the error and door pathways, both long prepared. With a deep breath, Klein exhaled. He chose to absorb the characteristics and uniqueness before him, as well as merge with the Saphira castle beneath him, truly becoming the Lord of Mysteries. I see. At the moment of his successful ascension, Klein opened his eyes with a sense of realization. He raised his hand and gently tapped the gemstone bracelet on his wrist. Immediately, a historical projection of the future Fool was summoned. Unlike previous historical projections, this one was clearly imbued with the consciousness of the future Fool from the start, though it was currently in a dormant state. Klein looked at the sleeping historical projection in front of him, knowing this was the final one. He also understood that this projection was none other than his former self. The timeline Lynn had created was not an entirely new one but rather a divergent possibility from the original. To put it simply, they were all, in a sense, reincarnators. They had lived through the original destiny, forgotten it, and come back again. Now, the moment had arrived for the 2 timelines to fully merge. "Stop sleeping, fool. It's time to wake up," Klein said softly. His voice wasn't loud, but the historical projection in front of him trembled slightly, then slowly opened its eyes. At first, those amber eyes lacked focus as they gazed at Klein, but within a few seconds, they regained the familiar brilliance Klein knew so well. The awakened Fool looked at the long-lost friend before him and couldn't help but smile, saying, "Good morning, Joe Mingrui. It seems I've finally reached the destiny I've been waiting for." Klein nodded, his gaze gentle as he looked at his future self, which was also his past self. "Thank you for your hard work. It wasn't hard at all." The past Fool shook his head, then suddenly said, "Maybe you could give me a hug." "Of course." Klein spread his arms and embraced his past self, gently patting his shoulder. "Goodbye. Goodbye." The historical projection disappeared, and Klein knew that from this moment on, the 2 timelines would fully merge, leaving behind Lynn's deepest mark. It was also the final step of his ritual. Klein carefully retrieved the crystal bubble Lynn had entrusted to him from the gray fog. Inside the bubble, a miniaturized version of Lynn had become clearly visible. "It's time for you to wake up too, Lynn. We all still remember you," Klein whispered softly. At that moment, not only Klein, but countless people across the world thought of Lynn. Some were his friends, some were his followers, and some were his employees. These countless memories formed the most solid anchor points, like beacons, transmitting signals into the distance. Far away, within endless time and space, in the midst of countless shining bubbles, a figure began to recondense. Though they had yet to open their eyes, it was as if 1,000 voices whispered in their ears. "Lynn, Lynn, you aren't really going to break your promise, are you? Lynn, if you don't return soon, I'm going to take over. Ammonizes, I'm not your dog, I'm Lynn's dog. Wait, I'm Lynn's worker. Lynn, it's time for you to return." The figure's eyelashes quivered. Lynn opened his eyes. "Phew, that was close, I nearly messed up, but thankfully, I had a backup plan." Lynn patted his chest in relief, then burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha, Nyarlathotep, I told you I'd get my revenge. Underestimate me, and you'll pay for it. That's right. By now, you must have figured it out. Everything had been part of Lynn's plan all along. He had long anticipated Nyarlathotep's schemes and had turned the tables on her, successfully devouring half of her, which had always been Lynn's true goal. Nyarlathotep might have seen it coming. At that moment, Yog-Sothoth spoke, his voice gentle. Even a short sentence seemed to contain vast knowledge, overwhelming to ordinary people. I know, but does it really matter? Lynn spread his hands and said calmly, no matter what, the fact remains that I now share her pillar position. With your help, I won't have to fear her anymore. Yog-Sothoth seemed to smile, though it was hard to tell. He only said, are you going back? Of course. After all, someone's waiting for me. Though, I can probably only send my avatar back from now on. Lynn sighed, seemingly resigned, but then he smiled and stretched. But that's not so bad. At least I can protect those worlds forever. It's your choice. Yog-Sothoth's voice remained warm. Whatever happens, I hope you find happiness. I understand. Thank you, Father. Lynn smiled brightly, his expression full of joy. Well, I should get going. They'll start worrying if I'm late. Bye-bye. Goodbye. In the spirit world, above the gray fog. The crystal bubble in Klein's hand suddenly shone brightly, then floated out of his grasp, suspended in midair. With a crack, the bubble shattered, and the figure inside quickly solidified, growing to normal size. Lynn stood above the gray fog. He instinctively glanced around, then set his eyes on Klein and grinned. Yo, Klein. Long time no see. You look pretty good. Long time no see, Lynn. Klein smiled too, extending his hand toward his longtime friend. Welcome back. The end of the story. Author's note, it's over. This ending might not satisfy everyone, but I gave it my all, and because of that, I have no regrets. I wish Lynn and everyone eternal happiness. TN. Well, this was one of the best Lord of Mysteries fanfics I've read. And like the author mentioned, the ending wasn't quite to my taste. It was my plan all along trope feels overused to me, but it works here, so I won't complain much. All jokes aside, thanks to the author for writing, and thank you amazing people for reading this.